I was at a small housewarming party last week, chatting with this quiet, seemingly intelligent guy out on the balcony. We were looking out at the city skyline, and he started talking about the sheer scale of the infrastructure. The steel, the grid, the complex engineering that keeps the lights on. He spoke with this genuine reverence for the labor behind it. But then, the conversation took a sudden, bizarre left turn. He gestured to the buildings and said, with total seriousness, "You know, if men vanish tomorrow, civilization ends. Women would literally wither away under the weight of doors they aren't strong enough to open." I laughed, assuming it was a dry joke. He didn't laugh back. His expression hardened, and he started explaining that because men built the world, women, or femoids, as he slipped into calling them, owe men a specific debt of gratitude. And to him, that gratitude shouldn't be a thank you, but physical submission. It was a chilling shift. In the span of 30 seconds, he went from an appreciation of architecture to arguing that a woman's refusal to date him was a form of reverse rape. It made me realize that his admiration for the skyline wasn't about engineering at all. It was about justifying a deep-seated weaponized entitlement. He truly believed that because men laid the bricks, he was owed a body. So how does a person reach that level of delusion? Let's look at the blueprint.
Wow. I mean, that's an incredibly rapid and frankly, a terrifying ideological shift.
Terrifying is the word.
It really is.
Yep.
And it perfectly illustrates the dangerous intersection we really need to dig into.
Right.
This whole mechanism of what we're calling weaponized entitlement. It's this worldview where, these deep personal grievances.
Often rooted in real pain, like isolation?
Exactly. Real isolation, genuine mental health crises.
Yeah.
And they get externalized, they get amplified online, and then they're justified.
Justified using these ideological frameworks and these really entrenched historical myths.
Mm-hmm. And that's our mission in this deep dive, isn't it?
It has to be. It's not enough to just, label this as hostility.
Yeah.
We need to dissect the intellectual scaffolding that's holding it all up.
Right.
So we're going to break down the psychological roots driving this alienation. We'll look at the online narratives that amplify it. And this is crucial.
Yeah.
We have to investigate the historical claims, this idea that men alone built the world, because that's what's used to justify the entire worldview.
You have to understand the whole structure. Otherwise, you're just treating a symptom, not the root cause. So let's start by mapping the psychological terrain.
Okay, let's start with a basic definition. We're focusing on incels, which stands for involuntary celibates. For anyone who has only heard this term in scary headlines, we need to be clear on what it actually means and how widespread this feeling of involuntary singlehood really is.
Right. So an incel is defined as an individual who has formed a self-identity around a perceived inability to form, sexual or romantic relationships.
And the key word there is involuntary.
It's absolutely crucial. They don't just see themselves as single, but as involuntarily single. And this status becomes the core of their self-perception. It's the center of their online subculture.
And the scale of this as a feeling is much, much larger than just these, dark corners of the internet.
Oh, far larger. There was a big cross-cultural study, I think over 7,000 people.
Wow.
And it found that 13% three of the people they surveyed identified as involuntarily single.
That is a massive number.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And it tells us something important. While, the radicalization into a violent ideology might only affect a small percentage of that group.
Right.
The underlying condition, this profound, unwanted loneliness, is actually quite common. And that represents a significant pool of vulnerability where personal pain can be, easily twisted into a toxic ideological grievance.
And that transition from personal pain to ideological grievance, that brings us right to their core belief system.
Yes. The black pill.
This isn't just about feeling unlucky in love. It's a whole worldview.
It is, precisely. The black pill is the central philosophy, and it's nihilistic.
Oh.
It's the belief that your romantic fate is pretty much determined by things you can't change.
Like your genetics or your looks?
Exactly. Immutable characteristics.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're doomed to lifelong loneliness, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to improve your chances. It's a total rejection of self-improvement in dating.
Intellectually, that sounds just paralyzing. And a key part of that fatalism is something they call the 80-20 principle.
Mm-hmm. The 80-20 principle it's like there's statistical justification. It's the belief that 80% of women are only interested in dating or having sex with the top 20% of men.
The so-called chads.
The chads, exactly. And we really can't overstate how important this idea is to them. It's not a fringe belief within the community. Nearly 2/3 of incels personally agree with this.
So by holding on to that statistic, they can completely externalize their own failure.
Completely. The logic is, it's not my fault, it's a structural flaw in the dating market, and that flaw was caused by society.
And when you externalize blame that way, you immediately create enemies, who ends up being the target for all of this grievance.
The structure of their grievance narrative is really specific, and it's what makes the radicalization possible because it justifies hostility. They consistently point to 4 primary enemies.
And who's at the top of that list?
Feminists. They are always cited as the primary enemy, blamed for, distorting dating dynamics and creating this 80-20 market.
And after that?
Next is the political left, who they see as enforcing cultural norms that favor women. Then you have wider society in general for just not recognizing their suffering.
And finally, I'm guessing.
And finally, specifically women, just women as a group, for exercising a choice that excludes them. This systematic naming of outgroups reinforces the whole narrative, It justifies the in-group's pain, and it focuses all that hostility.
It's such a tragedy where this self-perceived failure gets completely reframed as a kind of political victimization. But if we only focus on the ideology, we miss the huge personal crisis at the heart of it all.
Yes.
The source material is so clear that poor mental health isn't just a side effect, it's a primary driver of risk.
That is the critical distinction we have to make here. The urgency of this mental health crisis is frankly startling. Studies have found that poor mental health and believing in the black pill ideology were
more predictive of harm.
They were twice as predictive of harmful attitudes. So things like hostile sexism, rape myth acceptance, justifying violence, twice as predictive as just how much time they spent online.
So it's not just about being on the internet.
No. Simply being online doesn't cause the harm. It's the severe mental distress combined with a radical ideology that creates the danger.
So let's get into the specifics of that distress. What kind of clinical symptoms are we actually seeing here?
The data is really alarming. More than 1/3 of incels, we're talking 38.9%, meet the clinical criteria for moderate depression.
And anxiety.
43% meet the criteria for moderate anxiety. And, this isn't just feeling a bit down. These are clinically significant symptom levels that really need professional support.
And what about loneliness?
It's profound. Nearly half the participants, 48%, they selected the highest possible response for all 3 loneliness items they were measured on. So this confirms that, deep chronic isolation is almost a universal feature. They also show really high rejection sensitivity, so they're expecting to be rejected even when they're trying to find support.
That level of loneliness, combined with the fatalism of the black pill, it must create a perfect storm for just destructive thinking.
It does.
And we have to talk about the tragic link between self-harm and the potential for external violence, because those two things are so often connected.
They are deeply intertwined. The primary immediate risk of harm among incels is often directed inward at themselves. A really troubling 21.6% of the sample reported having suicidal thoughts every single day.
Daily.
This is a community in a very deep crisis. But this risk of self-harm frequently connects to the risk of external harm. When researchers look at male suicidal ideation, 2 of the strongest factors are failure in heterosexual mating and feeling like you're a burden to your family.
Which are core to the incel experience.
Exactly. And when you look at the broader landscape of violence, like mass shooters, the data shows this connection very clearly.
It's grimly consistent.
It is. The inner despair is so often a precursor to outward destruction. Across samples of mass shooters in general, a shocking 71.2% were either suicidal before the attack or they intended to die during it.
So the person who feels they have nothing left to lose,
who is profoundly alienated and who has an ideology that justifies their rage, that person becomes exceptionally dangerous.
Okay, so given that high risk and the fact that not everyone in this group is the same, we need to move past this monolithic view.
Yes.
Not every incel is driven by the same thing. And this is where the dual pathways hypothesis of harm becomes so essential for understanding who they are and maybe how to help.
But the dual pathways hypothesis is the critical framework. It is. It explains how different people arrive at these same hostile attitudes through 2 very distinct trajectories based on fundamentally different causes.
Okay, walk us through the first path. This one seems to describe people who might already have aggressive tendencies.
So pathway 1 is the dispositional extremism trajectory. This is driven mostly by internal, stable personality traits. These are individuals who score highly on what's known as the dark triad.
And let's be really clear on what that means. What is the dark triad?
The dark triad is made up of three traits. There's narcissism, so grandiosity, arrogance, a lack of empathy. Then psychopathy, which is antisocial behavior, impulsivity, ruthlessness. And finally, Machiavellianism, which is being manipulative and strategically exploiting other people.
So these are people who are already prone to dominance and exploitation. How does the incel ideology appeal to them?
Well, for someone high in these dark triad traits, the incel ideology provides a really robust justification for hostile and entitled traits they already have.
It gives them a narrative.
It gives them a perfect narrative. If you already believe you deserve certain things and society is denying you, the black pill gives you a convenient, fatalistic reason for your hostility. They tend to adopt right-wing political views that reinforce hierarchy, and they're motivated by this deep sense of entitlement and a propensity for dominance. The ideology just gives them a target for their malice.
Okay, so let's contrast that with the second pathway, which seems to be less about an innate hostility and more about, well, life trauma and social difficulty.
Right. Pathway 2 is the psychosocial vulnerability trajectory. This is driven by experiential factors. Here you see individuals who suffer from really high rates of social difficulty. For instance, about a third of this subgroup met the clinical cutoff for an autism referral.
So significant autistic traits.
Very significant. They also typically have very low self-perceived mate value. And often they have histories of adverse childhood experiences, like severe bullying or abuse.
So that history suggests rejection and isolation are the primary wounds, not this inherent narcissism from the first pathway. How do those vulnerabilities get channeled into these harmful beliefs?
Well, for those with high autistic traits, the social world, especially dating, can feel chaotic and really uncertain. The black pill ideology is appealing because it offers these clear, simple scripts or deterministic answers for why they're struggling.
It provides a sense of certainty.
Exactly, in a context that's otherwise ambiguous and full of painful failure. And for those with histories of bullying, that sense of victimhood can metastasize into intense resentment, which leads to a sense of entitlement.
But an entitlement based on a kind of debt.
Right, not based on superiority, but on a debt that they feel society owes them for their suffering. And that can justify harming other people.
So in both pathways, the individual's pain is funneled into a mechanism that results in the same dangerous outcome. What is that final output?
The output is uniformly characterized by highly aggressive attitudes. We're talking hostile sexism, a clear acceptance of rape myths, angry rumination, and critically explicit revenge planning.
Explicit plan.
Yes, and the combined data reveals just how severe this is. A substantial 24.6% of the overall sample felt that violence was sometimes or often justified against people who they thought were trying to harm them.
Which shows a pervasive internal culture where hostility and the threat of violence are seen as legitimate responses.
It's seen as a legitimate response to their perceived marginalization, yes.
The psychological wound provides the fuel, but the environment has to provide the oxygen and the direction. This journey from that deep psychological map to weaponized entitlement, it relies almost entirely on digital networks that validate and amplify this narrative of victimhood.
Absolutely. The network's component of radicalization is crucial here, and their behavior is very telling. When you look at the communication habits, you see this overwhelming preference for anonymous multi-person spaces.
Like forums.
Exactly. The most common methods are anonymous forums and social media, used by almost 55%, and registered social media or forums, used by 51%. After that, Discord servers are really popular.
Which means that real, genuine in-person connection is almost non-existent for the most active members of this community.
It's almost non-existent. Only 18% engage in any in-person communication at all, and a mere 5% rely on it as their main mode of contact.
And this heavy reliance on digital anonymous spaces, it enables a couple of key psychological processes that keep the ideology going.
Right. Self-verification and identity fusion.
Okay, explain how those two things work in practice inside an incel forum.
Okay, so the online spaces are fundamentally self-verifying. If an incel believes he's marginalized and doomed, the community reinforces that identity. They offer constant feedback, shared stories of rejection, agreeing on who the enemy is, and it all justifies their sense of being a victim.
And that just amplifies the rejection sensitivity they already have.
It amplifies it. And then identity fusion occurs. This is when the individual's personal identity strongly aligns with the group identity. I am an incel.
They become one and the same.
Yes, and once that happens, they become much more likely to endorse extreme collective attitudes and even violence to protect the group's shared worldview. The echo chamber doesn't just validate the grievance, it intensifies the potential for collective harm.
And to really get a sense of how serious this digital threat is, we have to put this misogynistic talk into the wider context of digital extremism.
Right.
The data from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, the ISD, it gives us a staggering sense of the sheer volume of all this.
The scale is immense. During a recent 2-month monitoring period, violent extremist actors produced over 1.28 million posts.
1.28 million.
In 2 months. And while dedicated incel forums are relatively small, these narratives are not isolated. They exist within this larger, high-volume digital ecosystem of hate.
And what are the main thematic areas that give space for these incel ideas to spread beyond their own forums?
Well, direct calls for violence were actually quite low, only about 0.8%.
Yeah.
But the broader conversations are where these narratives really plant their seeds. Technology and internet culture was 15% of the discussion, and culture and society was 14%.
And those themes overlap perfectly with the core concerns of incel ideology.
Perfectly. Discussions about social change, perceived cultural decline, critiques of dating apps, for example. This allows incel narratives, often disguised as just, sociological commentary, to reach audiences way beyond those who are explicitly searching for black pill content.
And does this broader extremist landscape just stick to the grievances we've been talking about, or does it bring in other forms of targeted hate?
Oh, it definitely includes broader categories of targeted hate, which really highlights the intersectionality of these extreme ideologies. Classifiers found targeted hate in 4.72% of messages across these spaces.
And what did that include?
It included 3% of messages being explicitly anti-Semitic, 1.65% being anti-LGBTQ+ sane, and 0.5% being anti-Muslim. Misogynistic narratives and the rhetoric of sexual violence, they often coexist and blend seamlessly with these other established hate categories, creating a kind of composite extremist identity.
So the online space is a refuge, it's a validation mechanism, and it's a radicalization factory. But how does this move from just online discussion to, real-world mobilization?
Mm-hmm.
The sources highlighted a really crucial example of targeted violence that galvanized these communities, and it challenges the idea that their focus is only on romance.
That example is vital for understanding the transferable nature of this grievance. The killing of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, generated a huge response. It produced over 4,500 messages among violent extremists online in a very short time.
And that's the key question, isn't it? If the incel community is defined by sexual grievance and failure, why would a corporate killing become such a galvanizing narrative for them? Does this show the grievance can just be transferred to any perceived high-status oppressor?
It absolutely does. The CEO killing showed that the underlying rage and this sense of being systemically victimized can easily transfer from romantic failure to general societal failures like healthcare systems, economic inequality, political corruption.
So the high-status individual, the CEO, the successful man, the high-status woman, they just become a symbol for the whole oppressive system.
Exactly. Attacking a target like that is seen as a blow against the power structures they believe are keeping them down.
And how did these extremist communities react to the alleged perpetrator? Was it condemnation or was it something else?
It was almost entirely valorization. Numerous people encouraged similar targeted attacks, and they labeled the alleged perpetrator a saint or a hero. Yes. The top-liked posts called him the patron saint of healthcare and a hero of the people. And this reaction is so critical because it functions as a template. It shows that targeted violence, especially against high-status individuals, generates immense support and serves as a powerful mobilizing narrative. It shows others that violent retribution is celebrated.
And that's the mechanism that bridges the online fantasy with the potential for offline action.
That's the bridge.
So we started this whole deep dive with that anecdote about the man who claimed he was entitled to a woman's body because men, he said, built civilization.
Right.
The entire toxic edifice of this weaponized entitlement is built on that foundational lie. The idea that men alone are responsible for modern infrastructure, science, everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're really going to strip away the justification for their grievance, we have to challenge that historical lie directly.
Absolutely. The whole ideological scaffolding collapses if we can prove the foundation is false. And when we trace the origins of this belief, that men are the sole builders, we uncover a historical mechanism of systematic erasure. It's been clearly documented, and it has a name.
The Matilda effect?
The Matilda effect.
So tell us about that. Who came up with the term, and how does it formally dismantle this myth of male-only genius?
The term was coined by the pioneering historian of science, Margaret Rossiter, back in 1993. And she named it after the 19th century suffragist and abolitionist Matilda Joslyn Gage, who wrote about this herself.
So what is the effect exactly?
The Matilda effect is defined as a systematic bias against women in male-dominated fields that results in their intellectual and scientific contributions being, well, minimized, ignored, or most often attributed entirely to their male colleagues.
It's the opposite of the Matthew effect, where famous scientists get more credit than they deserve.
It's the direct antithesis. The Matilda effect ensures female scientists get less.
And that concept is so essential because it just dismantles the whole idea of an inherent male meritocracy that these entitlement narratives lean on.
It does.
And Rossiter's research wasn't just descriptive. She meticulously documented how this historical camouflage was built.
It was groundbreaking work. She proved that the historical invisibility of women in science wasn't an accident or a lack of talent. It was due to, in her words, the camouflage intentionally placed over their presence in science. And he showed that it operated on two distinct levels of professional segregation.
Okay, let's elaborate on those two forms of bias because they really reveal the infrastructure of erasure.
So the first was territorial segregation. Women that were restricted geographically. They were often cloistered at smaller women's colleges or marginal institutions, so they were effectively removed from the major research hubs where all the resources, funding, and recognition were.
If you're not the center of power, you're not getting credit.
You're not getting credit. And the second form was hierarchical segregation.
And this dealt with their professional status even when they were at those big institutions.
Right. Even when they were hired, they were almost universally kept in these undervalued, underpaid assistant jobs. They were often called computers or just technical assistants.
So they were doing the essential work.
They were doing mountains of tedious, essential analytical work, but they were systematically blocked from promotion to research or professorships like their male colleagues. Male scientists would use what they called restrictive logic to justify blocking them, claiming women lacked rational capacity or focus, even while relying entirely on the woman's meticulous calculations.
The system was designed to ensure the labor was female, but the credit was male.
Precisely.
And the impact of this is so clear in the stories of women whose work literally shaped the modern world only for their names to be forgotten. Let's talk about Jocelyn Bell Burnell.
Jocelyn Bell Burnell's story is a textbook example of credit displacement. In the late 1960s, while she was a doctoral student in radio astronomy, she was the first person in her lab to discover the astronomical object that led to identifying radio pulsars.
A monumental discovery.
Monumental. Yet her male supervisor, Anthony Hewish, was awarded the 1974 Nobel Prize for the discovery, and she was infamously excluded from the citation, even though she did the actual work of detection and the initial analysis.
And who's another crucial figure whose contribution to fundamental physics was just deliberately obscured?
Chien-Shiung Wu. She was an experimental physicist vital to the Manhattan Project. Her critical work was on the law of parity, whether a physical process stays the same if you reverse its spatial coordinates.
And her experiment proved a violation of that law.
Yes, her experiment confirmed that the law of parity was violated by the weak nuclear interaction. And her findings helped win two of her male colleagues the 1957 Nobel Prize. She was not included, even though her experiment was the necessary proof for their theoretical breakthrough.
And crucially, the very infrastructure the man in my opening story was admiring, the complex engineering, the digital grid that was also built by women whose credit was stolen.
Absolutely. Think about Clara Dan von Neumann. She was a self-taught mathematician and the primary developer of the coding for the 1940s ENIZ computer.
The foundation for the entire digital age.
The ultimate piece of infrastructure. And yet, when the groundbreaking paper announcing the ENIAC's capabilities was published, she was not listed as an author. These women were literally laying the intellectual bricks of our civilization while the historical record was being camouflaged to hide their work.
And this erasure didn't just end in the 1950s. While things have improved, the source material shows that bias persists today in modern academia and industry.
It does.
Women fill nearly half of all jobs in the U.S. economy, but still hold less than 25% of STEM jobs. And we can actually see this bias operating through contemporary metrics, starting with academic paper acceptance.
Right. We can quantify the persistence of the Matilda effect through studies into academic publishing. And one of the major interventions to combat this bias is implementing double-blind review, or DBR.
Where both the author and the reviewer are anonymous.
Exactly. And the results are powerful evidence that bias is systemic when gender is known.
So what does the data show? How effective is DBR at leveling the playing field?
It's significantly effective. In one journal, Behavioral Ecology, introducing DBR led to a striking 7.9% increase in the proportion of female first-authored papers being accepted.
Wow.
And critically, this change was 3 times greater than the natural increase in female ecology graduates in the USA during that same period.
Which strongly suggests the quality was always there.
The quality was there, but the bias was only removed when the author's gender was hidden. Another study at the Evelang 11 conference found that female first-authored papers were ranked significantly higher under double-blind review than under single-blind.
So that confirms it. You remove the gender variable, and the quality of women's work is demonstrably recognized. It proves the bias is tied to the visibility of gender. But the bias doesn't stop at acceptance. It continues in visibility and career longevity, which is where the citation gap comes into play.
The citation gap is robust evidence that the Matilda effect continues to disadvantage women. Studies in fields like international relations show that women's articles are systematically cited less than men's, even when you rigorously control for quality, topic, and research strategy.
And we need to elaborate on the twofold nature of this bias, right? It's not just external reviewers, it's also the scholars themselves creating this gap.
Exactly. The bias is rooted in 2 scholarly behaviors that reinforce each other. First, men who still make up a disproportionate share of scholars in many fields tend to cite other men more often than they cite women.
A subtle but powerful feedback loop.
A very powerful one. And second, women scholars tend to cite themselves less frequently than men do. And if citation counts are the metric for tenure, promotion, and grant funding, which they are, this phenomenon structurally devalues women's work, reinforcing the very narrative of inferior contribution that the Incel ideology uses.
And we see the same prejudice in high-tech industries like open-source software. The analysis of GitHub pull requests revealed a fascinating and pretty sobering reality about identifiable gender.
It did. Initially, researchers found that women's contributions were actually accepted more often than men's overall, which was quickly thought to be due to survivorship biases, that only the most capable women make it through the hostile environment.
But then they isolated a specific group.
Yes, and this is where the finding becomes damning. They isolated contributions from outsiders, people who hadn't contributed to a project before, and where their gender was identifiable.
And what was the drop-off in acceptance when the female outsider's gender was known?
For those outside contributors, when their gender was identifiable through a profile picture or a name, women's pull request acceptance rates dropped by a staggering 12%.
12%.
12%. This confirms a persistent, active gender bias that surfaces the moment a woman's identity is visible. The quality is accepted when gender is hidden, but bias immediately interferes when it's known.
It's just so pervasive. It affects everything from getting credit for discovering pulsars to having your code accepted, and even, surprisingly, how supposedly fair exam grading is.
The grading bias is a perfect parallel. It shows how deep these cultural stereotypes run. Research at Stockholm University on exam grading found evidence of a same-sex bias before anonymous exams were introduced.
But the effect disappeared with anonymity.
It disappeared. But the most counterintuitive finding was the direction of the bias before the change.
Which was that both male and female graders showed bias against female students.
That is the profoundly counterintuitive result. Before anonymity, male graders scored male students higher than female students. But female graders also scored female students significantly worse than male students.
Which just demonstrates the sheer cultural power of this genius's male stereotype.
It influences judgment across the board, even among women who should be peers or allies. The ubiquitous nature of the Matilda effect ensures that this myth of male-only societal building persists, and that provides a seemingly rational justification for the entitlement narrative.
Okay, so we have now traced the blueprint of this toxic entitlement, from the initial psychosocial wound through the amplification of the digital echo chamber, and finally to the historical justification that's built on the erasure of women's contributions.
Right.
To conclude, we have to turn this understanding into a discussion of practical solutions. Where do interventions need to focus to effectively dismantle this pipeline of harm?
Well, we circle right back to that core insight from the psychological mapping. Effective interventions have to prioritize mental health and the deconstruction of toxic ideological beliefs.
Because those factors were twice as predictive of harm.
Exactly. Twice as predictive as just simple online engagement. We can't just police the networks. We have to treat the underlying needs and challenge the narratives directly.
So if mental health and ideology are the priorities, what are the most effective strategies? Let's start with the psychosocial factors, like that low self-perceived mate value and high anxiety.
Interventions need to directly target dating anxiety and social skills deficits. Since low mate value indirectly predicts harm through its severe impact on mental health, programs that focus on genuine dating skills, communication strategies, and confidence building are essential.
They reduce the low self-esteem and the resentment.
They do. And this is especially relevant and promising for that subgroup of incels with high autistic traits, where structured social skills programs can significantly enhance their dating confidence and reduce their reliance on these fatalistic explanations for failure.
But what about the ideology? The black pill is this comprehensive worldview rooted in fatalism. How do you counter such deep-seated cognitive distortions, especially when the community views mainstream society with such intense distrust?
That requires sophistication and credibility. Incels massively overestimate how much society dislikes them, and so they highly distrust any intervention they see as mainstream or feminist-led.
So you have to use messengers they'll actually listen to.
Precisely. The most effective strategy is to deconstruct the black pill ideology using messengers who are perceived as credible insiders.
So people who have successfully navigated out of the community themselves.
Exactly. Former incels who have disengaged from these communities, often found in online groups like Rinse Exit, they can serve as far more effective role models than any external professional. They can counter the cognitive distortions by providing real-world proof that the black pill isn't an absolute truth.
They offer an alternative narrative.
A narrative of success and improvement, which directly challenges the fatalism that keeps these individuals trapped in nihilism. This peer-to-peer approach can bypass the immediate skepticism they have toward mainstream help.
Beyond clinical and role model strategies, there's a push to leverage technology itself for intervention, since the radicalization happens online. How's that being done?
Technology offers crucial tools for identification and initial redirection. AdWord technology, which tracks specific search queries, can be used to divert incels who are searching with specific keywords toward intervention resources.
Similar to what's been used against other extremist content.
Exactly. It mirrors successful strategies previously deployed against jihadist and far-right content. It ensures the intervention reaches them where they are most active.
And once engaged, how can sophisticated tech, like AI, help counter the deeply held conspiracy beliefs that often come with these worldviews?
Well, advanced AI-based chat boxes, using models like GPT-4, have been shown to play a measurable role in reducing entrenched conspiracy beliefs. Studies indicate that even brief, non-confrontational conversations with an advanced AI can reduce these beliefs by a significant margin.
And that's particularly effective for which group?
It seems to be particularly effective for individuals on that dispositional extremism pathway. Pathway 1, the one's high and dark triad traits, whose political leanings are often strongly linked to conspiracy theories. AI isn't a complete therapeutic solution, but its 24-hour availability makes it a powerful initial part of a larger strategy.
Finally, we have to return to the issue of profound isolation. The high rate of loneliness in this community suggests the online network is a toxic replacement for real connection.
Loneliness is a significant documented driver of risk. The 48% of the sample who reported the highest level of loneliness are relying heavily on these nihilistic online echo chambers, which in turn reinforces their distorted, aggressive views.
So promoting real-world connections is key.
It's vital. Networking with other incels is directly linked to displaced aggression and angry rumination, and many of them report that their opinions of women got significantly worse after joining these communities. Reducing that isolation is essential to stripping away the network component of their harm. So we've completed the journey. We've traced the blueprint of this toxic entitlement. It starts with deep psychosocial wounds, whether it's vulnerability or predisposition, which are then reinforced by digital echo chambers.
And tragically justified by a flawed, male-centric version of history.
Exactly. And when we proactively correct that historical record, when we dismantle the myth of meritocracy by revealing the Matilda effect and the systemic erasure of women's contributions, we strip away one of the key ideological pillars of this weaponized grievance.
This work is fundamentally about removing the false intellectual ammunition they use to justify their hostility and entitlement.
It is.
And ultimately, the single greatest act of violence committed by the incel community may not be the few spectacular attacks that make headlines, but the pervasive, daily, self-inflicted harm driven by the belief that society offers them no future. A tragic irony, given that we now know that intentional historical erasure is the primary defense mechanism used to preserve the very structure of entitlement they crave.